We are recording. And here I sit, my name is Stewart Pearce, with the wonderful Mayet Leilani. I sort of do this, pointing to you on my computer.
Oh,
And here we,
little kisses.
bless you. And as you've noted, dear viewers, you know, we have this very unusual connection, which is a very heartfelt, soulful connection. And we've had a number of major conversations which have led us to deciding that we will record three very specific conversations. One we've recorded about mystical relationships. Today we're recording the cosmology of feeling. So let me please introduce this wonderful, wonderful lady, Mayet Leilani. And as I said, my name is Stewart Pearce, and welcome to this interview. The cosmology of feeling is a huge statement to make. And it was wonderful when I proposed it, when we were talking about the incandescence of all the subtle virtues of what feeling is all about, apropos our mystical relationship conversation. You said immediately yes, understanding what I was talking about, which was wonderful because I knew that you understood it intuitively. But we never really moved into a conversation about, so what is it you bring?
That's right. So what do you mean by that? So yes.
By the cosmology of feeling.
What?
Exactly.
So tell me first what you did mean by it. Where it is anyway today.
Well, very much in rapture with the substance of mystical relationships. I believe that we're at this extraordinary turning point or shifting point, a tipping point in our consciousness on planet Earth, where we are beginning to really understand a way back to remembering the power, the significance, and the soulfulness of what our core relationships are all about, or indeed what the core of all successful relationships need to be about, and that they are by nature co-creative because they are by nature divine, and how, I know we discussed a description of and the dynamics of how we can maintain mystical relationships. So similarly, arising out of that, the reason why the cosmology of feeling comes to me is because I feel again that we're in this extraordinary time of determining how we can live the greatest vision of ourselves. Mm. And when I see the greatest vision of ourselves, I look up and see the moon or the sun. And I remember that extraordinary photograph that you will remember, I'm sure, as well, from the 60s, when the astronauts, for the first time in recorded history, in human recorded history, took a photograph of planet Earth from the moon.
Yes.
And so my mind spins through the cosmos, and I'm very easy with that quality of experience. Cosmology of feeling, I feel that the cosmos is not a clever intellectual formula or formulae. I feel that it is actually a domain of abundant, infinitely unfolding creative possibility, full of love and joy. That it's not made up of, you know, we identify it as having quantum quarks and quantum foam and quantum mechanics. This is our way, I believe, of being able to perceive the richness and the diversity of what is generally known as the science of cosmology. For me, a supernova is a cosmic orgasm. It's the most extraordinary effusion of energy from the creative impulse that is there within the divine mind, as it were. So when I speak of the cosmology of feeling, I feel that feeling is the language of the soul, not thinking. Mm-hmm. And so I feel that we, as we embrace the remembering of the divine feminine on planet Earth at this time, because we're moving into the dawning of Aquarius, or we are in the dawning of Aquarius, and we know that our dear women have been suppressed for so many hundreds and hundreds of years, that now we're creating opportunities for women to have equal position with men, so that a much more dynamic, much more creative, much more alive conversation can take place. We know that when we move into that space, there is the expression of genuine feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really, you know, talking of the cosmos and then bringing it down to planet Earth, and how is understanding the richness of the cosmos from a feeling state point of view, how we can be very grounded in the acquisition of feeling. And if I may say just one more thing, then I'd love to know your response. Most of my experience, particularly over the last 40 years, has been accessing feeling, largely as a result of the craft skills that I developed for actors, working with great actors, training actors, coaching actors. And of course, right at the very core of great acting is a truth of feeling statement. So it's not about what they're thinking about. They're using the compass of their mental body to really access feeling states that then become these powerful powerhouses of radiating force. And it's this that cathartically shifts the audience. And then, of course, my work has then moved into helping dear ones that aren't necessarily actors, who may be in strife, maybe in conflict, maybe in distress, maybe in dis-ease, to try and find some way of being able to remind themselves of what miracle mindedness is all about, or what cosmos mindedness is all about. And that most of them, when I introduce them to the nature of, well, feeling is the language of the soul, understand and sometimes glory in this statement, but they don't know what they're feeling. That we, in other words, that we seem to have lost a feeling literacy, that our words have become very cerebral, very mechanistic, and very dogmatic. Whereas when we go back in our history, into our history, and we realize that when words were being used in a literary way to explore the substance of human consciousness and the beauty of human consciousness, that words were much more feeling based. So that's, in short, what I'm intending by the cosmology of feeling. Yeah.
And when I thought of cosmology of feeling, and then listening to your thoughts about it, I guess I would wonder, because I think more than one thing can be true at the same time, though they might appear to contradict, that we could say feeling is the language, as you said. But I think that we could also say at the same time that communion is the language of the cosmos, and that feeling is the connection point, is the entrance, is the portal or the doorway to communion. Without that access of emotion, then communing with and experiencing that fullness of the cosmos that you're pointing us to is difficult. It's made quite difficult. And the other thing I was struck with was when we use the word cosmology and we bring in the cosmos regarding feelings, it reminded me that there is an understanding amongst many shaman and mystics and other such people that I'm just pausing for the way I really want to say it, that emotion is highly desirable and that humans have a unique capacity for it, for better or worse, a unique capacity. And that throughout the cosmos is understood and known to be desirable. And that there are other beings throughout the cosmos who learn from us in this regard. Mm-hmm. So certainly we live the downside of feeling. Mm-hmm. But I just think that your experience and training is such a perfect way to understand the reason for and the real use for and the real power of feeling, of our feeling nature.
Mm-hmm. That's
And I
beautiful.
think part of the reason that it's so desirable to come here, and it is, regardless of how things appear now, it's extremely desirable to come here for this experience. And part of the reason is to immerse in and get lost in and continue in a mastery, toward a mastery of this cosmology of feeling that we're talking about. So bringing it into relationship, that's the larger context that we're all associating with as we do it with one another, for better or worse, and as we do it between nations and so on. Really, that we're working on this one. How can this become the rich potential and blessing that it's meant to be, and still have the full spectrum of feeling, not just the good feelings, no thank you to all the bad feelings. They're all just energy. They're all just energy. Anger is the energy of the sun. It's just that kind of energy. It doesn't need to be turned on someone or something or a place to do damage. But nor does it need to be completely taken out of the vocabulary of feeling.
Many thoughts come to my mind. Thank you. That's beautiful. To celebrate the conviction of the fact that we are part of an intergalactic confederation, these angels come to me who, let's consider them as extraterrestrial, because they are.
Because they're not of the earth.
Because they're not of the earth.
They're not terrestrial.
Exactly. And they've introduced me to some very extraordinary beings. They've introduced me to Lyran from Lyra. They've introduced me to Syrians. They literally introduced me to Arcturians. And once they introduced me to a group of beings that do not live within our galaxy, they come from elsewhere and are known as ultra-terrestrial. I remember when I first heard that, which is some time ago, over 20 years ago, I remember saying, wow, I've never considered that, that we have intelligent life, which is not hominid, not humanoid, existing in other parts, in other galaxies beyond our own. However, the point that I wanted to refer to is that the angels have said that, that many of the intelligent species that are not humanoid, that live beyond our planet or beyond our universe, look at us with awe. Because in many ways, I see the cosmic joke of them saying, how did you do that? That here we are in flesh. Here we are in weight, space, and time. And they're very dense energies. They're not. They're in light. And so how did you just do that? How did you just do, did you do that? How did you walk? Or indeed, how did you conceive of a child? Because they don't have bodies, and therefore things aren't slowed down. And that there is this immense appreciation, even though we may look at some of the deleterious or negative behaviors of our species, particularly at the moment, because there is a lot of grossness, there is a lot of ugliness, but there's also a tremendous amount of joy and glory and victory happening in the substance of the frank expression of love, dare I say, being brought about by the fact that you extraordinary women are stepping forward and claiming your sovereignty. And it's very remarkable. I need to do a little bit more clear. I need to organize my statistics more clearly. But there are, for example, in Central Europe, there are 5 countries that are now governed by female presidents or prime ministers. And of course, one is very sparkling because she has been a heroine in the substance of COVID. And this is the wonderful Jacinta Ardern in New Zealand, who has brought about some extraordinary political changes. Anyway, And her whole political stance is not devoid of feeling. It's fully accessing feelings.
Mhm.
So we see her compassion, we see her empathy, we see her emotional intelligence, which, after all, has not necessarily been a viable commodity in the debate of the political chambers or the academic councils around the world. I mean, I can remember being sent out of board meetings in, when I lived professional roles in establishment 20, 25, 30 years ago for mentioning the word soul or emotional
Mhm.
intelligence. They would say,
Yes.
"What are you talking about? For God's sake, get out,"
Yes. And don't bring that here again. Yeah. And the female force of creation, the female side of the force of creation is typically shown in many belief systems as wild,
Mm,
completely, wild, even, as the destructive force as well, that they are the same. And so without that, creation isn't. Without that, and when that enters into a human being, it can, into an earthling anyway, it can show up as rather wild emotional capabilities for love, as well as any destructive
mm,
one.
mm,
And we're all then students of this. And so when when we move through our life, we we may have felt and feel many of those ones we would call negative,
mm,
and they create rather intense imprints that, in part, are called karma. And then we work with how all of this emotion imprints. And part of our intent for this conversation was about dealing with the difficult patterns,
mm,
but they're a response of emotion and and a byproduct, in a way, of emotion. And we we came knowing this. It can't be that we came hoping not to encounter any of that, you
mm,
know. And certainly I would say if we've come more than once, we haven't achieved
mm,
not encountering that. And so we don't want to have these problems.
mm,
We want it to be over with. We want to reach some point where we're beyond it. And many of our spiritual philosophies sort of dangle that promised land when we're no longer so troubled by the negative emotions. But I think it's misthinking that comes from more typically controlling religious times, um, as a way to help us or make us focus on, things are terrible now, but when you die, you'll be in heaven. That type of thinking has a residue that has us trying to get out of all the time what is unpleasant in terms of our feelings. And yet we also know it doesn't work. It doesn't matter how much we keep trying, it doesn't work. And if we are to look at the great creative archetypes and forces, then I would say, no, it's not about getting rid of. They are part of it. And it's about deeper and fuller understanding of it. And at our stage, perhaps removing fear about it, still removing fear about those great forces in us, and fear about, and self-judgment about having impressions and patterns created by them. I think this is the place we know what it's like, and we come knowing this is like the place where things can go awry you know, they say there's no accidents. I kind of wonder about that. It's true at one level, but in another level, this is the place where accidents can happen,
Mm.
so that, you know, other things can happen. And we come as, in a way, experienced travelers in this, knowing that, you know, we might get blasted and we might land badly on our heads. That's all part of the appropriate risk of being here. You know, it's not something to fear. We then are taught to really fear all of that. But I have a hunch that when we raise our hand to say, I'll go, we feel fully up for it.
Go.
I'm going to Earth this time.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I'm now going to heaven. Yes, and you know, and I feel that
I'm now coming to Earth. You know, I
yeah,
agree. My hands up. I'm one of those. I'll go now. I'll go down to Earth.
and therefore there's ringing throughout the cosmos is the significance, this resonance of the fact that this is a cosmic experiment. This planet is a cosmic experiment to see what the law of two suspends within the consciousness of the planet, with all sentient life. That this is the only planet of choice. We've lost our way with this, as you really beautifully have just said. We've lost our way because, after all, when we're feeling the darker emotions, whether it's to do with worry, anxiety, fear, or anger, or I'm going to commit suicide, or I'm going to kill you, the darker, severe emotions, we see them to be wrong, and therefore we push them away. And as a result of that, they are deeply interwoven through so many people's physical and emotional fiber that they percolate out at times of extreme societal change, like now, as undiluted rage.
Yes.
And that's what's so worrying. Whereas if we go back into the idea of the Greek dramas, for example, which was evidently a very interesting point of the development in human consciousness on our planet, that there was a catharsis involved. You know, that if, for example, we were in societal conflict, we would go to the theatre and we would either watch tragedy happening and therefore we would weep, but we would weep out our pain about what just happened, or we would laugh. You know, great farce, somebody slipping on a banana skin, rather than satire,
Right.
which is much more to do with wit. I was horrified as a child. I mean, I never found Tom and Jerry funny. I would sit and weep.
Me too.
And this is, of course, before TVs. You know, that we were taken to the cinema to see
Yes, that's
these
right.
cartoons, you know, produced by Walt and the team. And I'm sure that it was to do with the empathic understanding of the fact that violence can destroy or diminish, at least, rather than at worst, diminish somebody, even if it was Jerry that was being diminished.
Yes.
Tom was the cat and Jerry was the mouse. Is that right? Or was it the other
Tom
way around?
and Jerry. Oh, I can't recall anymore. Had I not stopped to think about
Now
it enough.
that's significant. It's
Yeah.
not necessary, is it? Really not
Right.
necessary. You see, we've moved on. So duality is a key, you know. But at the same time, you know, I just wanted to once more go back into the cosmological effervescence of what feeling states are all about, and to share with you that I met a group of beings who are not from our galaxy, and they call themselves the Hathors. This is about 20 years ago that they came to me in the middle of the night, and they taught me for about 3 weeks about feeling, because they said, we want you to really educate people and help people develop a literacy about feeling, because you human beings have forgotten what mercy means, or you've forgotten what rage means, or you've forgotten because you're terrified of the volubility of the power of these states. And so they said, you know, once we were in flesh, millennia ago, we were in flesh. We were not humanoid, but we were in flesh. And what we did was to move through the varying degrees of what feeling states are all about, so that now we can say to you very easily that our lowest feeling state is something you call ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Ah,
I
okay.
found that very illuminating,
Yes,
the
that is
sense
very
that we
illuminating.
are
Yeah.
evolving. But sure, and if we look into the great masters, and by that I mean the great saints or the great prophets, there is always the permissibility around the darker, more voluble forces of rage or anger. I mean, for example, I think it's in St. Luke. There is the story of Christ going into the temple, into the synagogue, to recognize that the synagogue is being misused by the money changers and the tax collectors. And he overturns tables. In Luke, it says he picks up a whip. It doesn't say he hit anybody, but I bet Indiana Jones style, he gave the air a great crack and said, "You will not defile my father's house." In other words, anger is permissible in self-righteous situations where right needs to be brought back into balance, that if we go into the wrong mind, we need to be brought back into the right mind where we make choices that are infinitely more loving and less selfish.
And that's a very well studied example of how we think about that. So it's anger is justified in self-righteous situations. So we see all the trouble that's gotten us into because it's still something very outward directed, you know, and it's still about someone having judged that's a bad thing. And so anger is justifiable. And then we're in all the conundrums that happen as we try to weigh that and figure it out. When I'd like to invite you now, I think it would be so interesting for you to take us back to here we are in the middle of going, all right, then, you know, own all these emotions. Now tell us what you so many times have told an actor how to use it, you know, not to bash at the other actor. That's not the thing that necessarily brings the role across, I suspect. So I'd love to hear you tell us to inform us more about what we can do with emotion and how that really progresses our life by telling us what you tell them about progressing a role and reaching the audience.
Yes, it's interesting because let's say, for example, there is an actor who is very facile and is able to access very easily very, very dark feeling states because they're playing a serial murderer or they're playing, you know, those darker edged energies such as rage. The first statement is that it's really important that the actor not judge the person they're playing,
Mm-hmm.
but to recognize that they're becoming an embodied vessel for these powerful energies to pour through in an archetypal fashion to bring about a greater awareness in those who are gathered before them, whether it be watching them on a screen or watching them on stage, which is going to become a mitigating force to change or to expand, is a better way of putting it, to expand the landscape of that individual's life and thereby to heal cathartically anything that they may be experiencing, which they found difficult to express.
Do you think that one can really progress roles and express in a believable way if an actor is afraid of or not in touch with their feeling?
It means that on a subtle level, the actor is always masked and therefore
Uh-huh.
lying.
And that's really important to bring into this.
Really significant, yeah.
Yes.
And so we get
So
used
we
to,
are masked.
yeah,
That's the result.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so
Because
well.
we see that lust is wrong. We see that anger is wrong. We see that judging someone is wrong. We see, you know, we're always condemning. We have no mercy for
Mhm.
these
Yeah.
energies. You were saying that it's just
Yes.
a word that describes as an energy rather than, no, that's wrong, it's got to be put away. You know,
Mhm.
I'm very open with what I feel, with, and open also to the possibility that I could be wrong in my perceptions when somebody in the work asks me to make comment. And
Mhm.
often I'm very bold about what I say about our conduct. And often people who are observing this say, but you're supposed to be a spiritual person. Why are you judging? And my statement is, what gives you the impression that I'm judging this? I'm merely observing this. This is what I refer to as being discernmental, not
Mhm.
judgmental. In other words, I'm not attached to the feeling state that's being spoken about. And therefore, I'm not projecting my spleen, my anger, my rage, my envy, my jealousy, my hatred onto this person. I'm
Mhm.
just simply saying, was that the most appropriate behavior?
Mhm.
When they've been palpably inappropriate. Is
Yeah.
falsehood appropriate? So I'm not talking about if this is good or bad, right or wrong. I talk about, is this accurate? Is this inaccurate? Is this appropriate? Is this inappropriate? And therefore it removes the judgment. Because if we say, but that's wrong, we've automatically judged it.
And that type of thing creates a depression or an impacting. So that's how things get packed in, like, tamping the dirt down and down and down and down and down until it's a solid brick. That's how things get deeply in and become then difficult to sort out, to say the least. But I mean, difficult to distinguish the parts and pieces of, because it's now one tamped together type of thing. And that's where, in my own life anyway, I've seen it becomes something that I feel emotionally illiterate about,
Mm.
that I don't seem to know what I'm feeling. And that to me is generally a signal that there's a lot of conflict in there,
Mm.
many things,
Mm.
and as well as probably conflict about wanting to see it at all, of course. And those things in my life, some of them have been master teachers that,
Mm.
have been with me a long time and come and repeat in different ways. That is, in essence, one definition of
Mm.
karma, unresolved intensity.
Mm.
And when it's intensity with many complex layers that are now absolutely mashed into one, can be very hard to reach. And so that creates a whole language and pathway of releasing, cleansing, all of these sort of trying to get rid of things, because we do see how they limit us. And so we write the things we discover on paper and burn them in smoke, and we are prayerful, and we go to workshops, and we do many things about it.
Mm.
And yet, in some cases, the impressions made by these create such an intensity that is difficult to reach. And in this time, not just our time together, but in these times, I especially want us to spend a little time thinking together and talking about these impressions, because I can see, in my own life included, but I can see around me and with clients and so on, that people sincerely are trying so hard to understand how to deal with and move beyond these kinds of things. And
That's not my experience, to be honest.
oh, I see it all the time. The people are going, why is this still with me? I thought I've cleared it
Ah,
before.
no,
That
absolutely,
type of pattern.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have resolution about that, which is
Mm-hmm.
that you see, I feel that just to go back a couple of beats or a few more than that, I feel that part of what you were talking about is the volume, is the capacity of feeling. and that our bodies are quite small because we've been encouraged to live them in small ways. So we become quite inhibited about what we're feeling, even to the point where we don't allow the most intimate person in our lives to experience the height and the depth and the breadth of our passion, of how we can really let go into the wildness of truth, the wildness of lovemaking, the wildness of play, or the wildness of our rage. The number of times that an actor will say to me, I couldn't possibly go there because the point of access is huge anger. I couldn't possibly go there because if I did, I'd break the whole room up. And I would say, okay, well, why don't you go there? Because these are pieces of wood called furniture. They're all dispensable. Nothing is indispensable here. You know, another chair can be bought, or this could be repaired if you break it. So just go there, go there, go there. Just unleash. And I've never seen anybody do it. But what they do, and often I would create pressure exercises where, for example, you know, if an actor was finding it really difficult to move through the thoughts of a speech, because the thoughts are the crucial vehicle that we look into to explore the arc of the thought, but you have to live the density of each thought and give it its rightful place and give it its capacity. That I would often scatter chairs around a studio and say, okay, go to a chair and speak the thought, go to another chair and speak the next thought. So they would actually begin to see the ladder of the speech developing in front of them. And sometimes I would say, and if you feel moved to it, kick the effing chair. You know, allow yourself to explore. And sometimes there would be something very voluble, and it was always so exciting and glorious, because here is a human being who is being utterly real in their passion, even if there are tears flowing down their cheeks and thick, gooey liquid pouring out of their noses. There's something so raw and wild and special about the limits that they're prepared to go to really show, not to demonstrate, but to illustrate or just be what human emotion is about. And as well as always all the refined stuff.
Yes, yes. And to have it's such a relief. All of us can reflect on when we've been with a person, whether it's a counselor or a partner or a friend, who can allow it to be so messy, and who can serve as the witness and giving permission or allowing the permission we're taking. So I think that permission to do that is something that should be navigated first with oneself, of course. Permission to get messy. Permission to go past that barrier of I might ruin something, I might ruin the room, you know, I might in fact burn everything down. This what I feel is so big. I might burn everything down. I might blast everything to smithereens. What I feel is so big. So permission to do that more with one another. I had a wonderful friend who passed recently who had such permission for that. And she was very wise about it in her own life. And it wasn't necessarily easy for people to be part of in a relationship, even just a friendship exchange, when that would start happening. Until with me, for instance, I realized there's 100% permission to meet her and to learn then, for instance, what I didn't learn, and so many people didn't learn in their own childhoods, but in my childhood, it was be very careful, because Humpty Dumpty can never be put together again. Not all the king's horses and all the king's men can put that poor fellow together again. So don't break the egg. And the few times in my own family when that was unavoidably trespassed, Humpty Dumpty was broken, and it was 30 years before it could be put back to, before people knew how to bring that back together. So certainly I learned, don't break the egg, you know, permission, but only to a point, and permission, but only with diplomacy, and that type of thing. So of course, in my life, when I wanted to start following my passion, to be more honest and to own more of myself, there was the first barrier, was this deep belief that things will break and we don't know how to repair them.
Yes.
And they will be lost.
And you see, I feel that the skill that we're being given, the awareness that we're perhaps nudging ourselves towards in this conversation, and the skill that we're being given by inspirational means, is the fact that all we need to do is to rest in the fulcrum of the fact that nothing is singular, everything is plural on this planet. So where there is...
Would you say that again, that nothing...
That nothing is singular, everything is plural, binary force. There is light and dark. There is male and female. There is love and hatred. There is terrible anger, but there is also glorious freedom. There is guilt. There is innocence. You know, that guilt is contaminated innocence. That wherever there is shame, there is always unbridled extroversion, you know, etc., etc., etc. That if we can see this, and I feel that something very remarkable is happening as the cap has been taken off the shadow, the cap that has been taken off the way that we pushed feeling states down. We pushed lust down, and they can only be explored in private. And so we see the prelates be wonderfully honest or revelatory or authoritative in public, and then backstage we're learning actually what they were doing is allowing themselves to bugger the boys, or you know, the pedophiles were interfering with the girl, whatever. Everything is unbridled at the moment, and it seems that in this unbridling we're seeing the true force of what it is to be human. William Blake said something very interesting in the 18th century, you know, the grandfather of Romanticism, where they began to see that the Industrial Revolution was literally changing the landscape of their lives. I mean, in a very literal way, because suddenly a steam engine would be pouring across the landscape, whereas before it would have been a horse and cart. And he said, joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. When this ye rightly know, safely through the world ye go. So it's a very beautiful, beautiful way of placing all of this, except it also does suggest the yo-yo of, as we see with babies, joy, woe, joy, woe, joy, woe, joy. And I believe that we're being offered an opportunity of suspending that. So that we don't, you know, we've explored the darkness. If we're Renaissance individuals and we're completely honest with our own healing, it means that we've seen where the darkness lies. We've seen where our rage, where our lust, where our hatred, where our envy, where our jealousy, all of those dark, dark emotions, our lives have been through, you know, the gymnasium of being able to sort those feeling states out from a volubility point, from a capacity point of view. And it seems to me that that's really what life is about. It's about identifying what am I really feeling and seeing, oh, that's what it's called, and that's how big it is. It's huge, like Juliet said. My love is as boundless as the sea, because she was experiencing that for the first time in relation to Romeo, you know. Well, of course, and she was 14, but I know what that feels like. And actually now I'm bleep, 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 much older than 14. I still feel it's that big, you know. And if I don't fall in love at least once a day or once a week with something, somebody, some beautiful animal, then I think something's wrong with me. As I get carried away with feeling.
And that great capacity to love, to feel love, in the physicality in the actual physical makeup of life, might, and not just to feel love, but to feel within the minerals and clay, within the density of form, I sense is more profound than we're capable of understanding, more desirable than we can at this time really know what happens. We know that you can go to places where there've been war after war after war upon this particular area of land, and you can feel the warring. So we know that something gets imprinted in physical matter of emotion. And of course, we fear that. But it's what is unconscious that causes the trouble, not what is conscious. And to say, therefore, none of that should have happened, well, on one level, yes, of course, we do want to evolve beyond that happening. But not that it shouldn't have happened. The benefit still of coming across that must be there. There must be good and benefit in that, including, you said a moment ago, knowing what it is to be human. It's all about deeper understanding of what it is to be human.
Yes.
What it really is to be human.
And then divine and animal.
Yes, and if we can really learn, we won't ruin everything, and we will and can and are figuring out how to put it back together again. Learning, becoming good at that. That, I think, is one of the thresholds that we're standing on. Things now so divided that, looks like Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall there. Poor fellow. Like the country can never come back together again, for instance. There's that deeply learned feeling that what is cast too far asunder can never be put back together. And yet, maybe that's what we're here, in this period of our time to begin to see is we can put it back together. How? Let's be asking, let's be intent, instead of trying not to be anything that might crack the egg, which hasn't worked for us.
It is absurd to suggest that, although it's rather beautiful in its poetry, on one level it's completely superficial. It's absurd to suggest that anything that is cast asunder cannot be repaired, because everything can be repaired when we use the art of alchemy. That's the whole point. Even years and 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 years of deep sorrow, that eventually, if that person, if it is appropriate, all in the face of divine will, if it is important for that person to move into an escalated state or into an aspirational state, into a transcendent state, it can take place. I've seen extraordinary things happen in my life, particularly with the disease with the disease cancer, where, because my mother over 40 years ago perished from cancer, and my whole life shifted from a professional point of view, from an aspirational and creative point of view, in order to serve her for a year. She was given 3 months, but she actually lasted over a year. So I was part of that conversation of watching a very beautiful being, both inside and outside, rot from a disease. And what that means on feeling levels, because that's physiological, is the statement of, how are you feeling today? Terrible. So there is no hope. In other words, all there is despair and depression and jagged confusion. And I loathe this, if there's will enough to express that. And then, of course, eventually there's the resignation or the surrendering into, not transcendence, but the surrendering into the disease. I confess that made me so angry all the way through.
Mm.
And I believe that it was my anger that kept me alive to support whatever life was left in her body until the final moment when I remember it was about 4 o'clock in the morning when suddenly she said to me, "I'm dying, get me into hospital." And she was, obviously in the home that we created for her when my father had died. And so, as she had done to me when I was an infant, I picked her body up into my arms, and her head was here, and I carried her into the car, and which I'd literally driven up onto the sidewalk so that we didn't have far for her to, for me to journey with her, and put her into the passenger seat and strapped her in with the seatbelt, and then drove off. And she said to me, "Darling, would you take me past all the old haunts," which meant where the family had lived, where because our lives were completely involved in the substance of the people whom they served, which was the British royal family. They lived in this grace and favor situation. So I drove all the way past, at 5 o'clock in the morning to let her see, to say goodbye, and then got to the hospital, and she immediately went into a coma.
Wow.
The transition of that. And then, of course, 24 hours later, whatever, I wasn't there. My brother was there. The eldest, the firstborn, was there, was there, although she was comatose. She was literally foggy with morphine. The nurses were able to say, "Your mother has died." And there was absolute joy, not the horror of death, but the joy of transcendence. So that thing of how ugly death can be, and I mean the dying of a relationship, the dying of a life, the dying of a forest, the dying of an old regime, because we have memory of it being glorious and wonderful as well as being shitty and dark. But the glory of that actually we can remember these things in a very sweet way while we turn to the future and move into pure transcendence. In other words, after death comes resurrection, so that you remember, I remember as a child, the weeping was so raw, and just volumes of it passing through this little body that I had. And yet then suddenly it would stop. And there would be this peace after the storm.
Yes.
And fortunately for me, there was always, no matter what created the tears, even if it was self-willed, there was always love. My mother was always there to hold and to say, all conditions are temporary. Or it will pass. She was always there with that comfort, I suppose is the right word to determine the feeling. I was very fortunate. Many of the people that I work with did not have that experience. And I would, just to finalize that, I would like to say that in terms of the cosmology of that feeling, but what was interesting after a week after her death, that I was now throwing myself into mourning and grieving and grieving and weeping, because it was my job to sort out all the goods and the chattels. Remember that phrase? All of the personal possessions. And so, of course, there I was dealing with the life of the person. And there was a pinnacle point because I found this box. Well, of course, I didn't find the box. I knew the box because I don't know if you had this. We all had boxes and our treasures went into the boxes. But of course, my brother's box and my box were open. They weren't locked. But Mama's box was locked. And it was very beautiful with this lovely little key. And of course, I now had right of passage to open it. So I knew, of course, I knew where the key was. I didn't need to search for the key because all babes know where the key is, like trying to find presents, on Christmas Eve. Where did Santa Claus put the Oh, I know where they were. We become very artful. We intuitively.
Yes, right.
So I opened this box, and inside this blue velvet lined box were these tiny pieces of paper. They were little scrolls. And I thought, what on earth is this? Tied in blue and pink ribbon. And I started reading them. And they were the love letters that young Kay and young Joe had written, Joe, obviously Joseph, had written to one another. This just happened to be my mother and father. But no, this was beyond this. I was seeing the young Kay and the young Joe falling in love, and these were the love letters. And so I read every single one of them and wept and wept and wept at the beauty of the love they had and what had created me eventually.
Yes.
And then I thought, no other human being must see these. And so I took them outside and I created a fire puja and I burned them. I felt that they needed to go into infinity. And then I came back, and once again, the waves of grief moved through me. And in the middle of this, I was in her bedroom, the whole of the room became brilliant white light. And she was there saying, no more tears, just pure joy. You did what you needed to do. The ritual is over, and now get on with your life. And I will always be with you. So that's what I mean by a physical realization, an emotional realization, a feeling-based realization of the cosmology of what my relationship with my mother was all about.
Mm-hmm.
That it could move from death into resurrection.
Yes, yes. And that as an arc in any of our, more intensified, especially relatings, is a really beautiful one to contemplate. And in what you said, I was struck by a couple of things. You mentioned that great eruption of feeling that occurred for you as a child, a sort of tsunami. And I realized then, oh, of course, children understand this about emotion. They move into it like crazy, to the concern of all the adults around them and, interfering with daily life and so on. And then it's over. And they're not worrying about Humpty Dumpty or any kind of thing. They're excessively joyful and completely displeased, inconsolable, so many things. And we think as a parent, what we must do is sort of train all that out of them, right? And in fact, now as adults, I would say we're trying to relearn that a bit. And trying to let go of the fear we were taught of it, because the screaming 2-year-old is indeed quite a problem at a restaurant,
Absolutely.
But it's now much more of a problem the other way around, I think. So we're trying to become more like childlike in this.
Yes, I mean, I watched it yesterday in the supermarket. The 2 to 3-year-old, of course, the terrible twos. I call it supermarket shouts. When you suddenly hear a child bawling and you look, and there's a little babe, 2 to 3-year-old, but they're inconsolable, and mummy and daddy are so embarrassed. Or the child is being willful and really angry. And there's daddy getting angry with the child and saying, put that away, who do you think you are? Which is what we were told, who do you think you are? So, and I would stand there and just laugh, because here is the father getting angry about the boy being angry or the daughter being angry. And so telling them to put it away. Come on, have a little bit of levity. Just allow the volubility to live, and then it will be expended, because often it's not about what the parents thinks it's about. It's just the release of energy, the release of energy. Supermarket shouts, I always think it's the child saying, can we just stop all this doing? I just want to be. But of course, that rationalization is not there. That calculation is not there. So what we do is and it's really interesting watching how young parents learn to deal with that. Not that I wish to grade what's good and what's bad, because that's not what I'm about to say, but it's always interesting how the mothers that are the true empaths just pick the child up and hold the child and soothe the child, and the child then
Settles eventually.
melds into something else.
Yeah.
It's like my godson, who was 6, and Clarence died, the Siamese died. And so I was met by this little boy weeping immeasurably. And so I said, okay, darling, so what would you, he said, can you pick me up? So I said, of course, I picked him up. And there he is, weeping into my, and this little voice is saying, Clarence died, Clarence died. And I said, okay, well, that's one perception, silence. Is there another one? Yes, the other perception is that Clarence has gone to heaven. Because after all, Clarence was such a good friend and was always loving and always playful and always taught us. Do you really think so? And suddenly the whole thing changed. Okay, you can put me down now. Transition. As
Yeah.
opposed to, it's so voluble. Well, I mean, we slap them or whatever.
Right. Yes.
Yes. So it's interesting because we're reaching the end of our time together in this 60-minute conversation. But there's the vastness. Was there anything final that you wanted to commit yourself to?
There is one more thing that came to me because of that beautiful gift you gave us in sharing the story of your mother's passing. When my son died, he was just 9 months old, and this was many years ago now. My, at the time, husband and I experienced that quite differently. And we could say that he did in a more typical way, this, denial and the stages like that. But when I had discovered him walking into the room, immediately something in me knew, don't go to the crib, something's amiss. And so there was that moment of denial where I went to the window and I noticed the last of the evening sun in the dust motes and realized he's not alive. And I hadn't been to the crib anymore, and I had no reason to think that could be so, but I knew it. And then I went to the crib. And he died of sudden infant death syndrome. And he was already stiff. And so I touched him and could tell immediately, and I straightened, feeling his essence still in the room. And then the only way I know how to explain it is that I experienced the angel of death or something. Maybe this guide or messenger who is there at that particular moment, not the guide that will take us on. And I understood, it was like I saw a giant wave about to crash over me. And so much so seemingly physical that I threw my arms up like that in fear of this enormous wave that I could not live through. When this messenger gave me to understand, telepathically I would say, that it was a choice, that I could let the wave crash over me and in fact survive it, or I could go the path more common, and that both were viable paths. And I asked, could I survive that wave? Because it was in essence not to place a barrier between me and that feeling, that experience that was about to crash, that knowing, to have no buffer. Can I survive that? And they said, yes, if you walk with death. If you walk with death, then you will learn what it is to walk with death. And the shaman in me, without thought, okayed that, in a way said yes. And that wave hit me and it took me to my knees. I so fully knew he was gone without any adjustment. I completely understood his note will not be in my song in this physical life again. And it was so intense, I thought, I've made the wrong choice. I won't be able to survive this. I can't even breathe. It's like being underwater. I'm not going to get to the surface. And I struggled to get up. I struggled with this. I felt fear that I'd chosen wrong. When it passed, and then death said to me, it is an ebb and a flow. All emotion is an ebb and has an ebb and a flow. And I think keeping that in mind about our emotions is they are fluid, they are watery, as we know. They are, in fact, the essence of the element of water. And letting it come through us is what keeps the dam from breaking. Even like with death, we all know what I'm talking about in this experience. It came again and was difficult, and then it went out, and it had a difficult kind of beauty, but I walked it and I experienced it, and my husband went another route with it, and they were two very, each of them a valid way. But what I learned in it was all intensity passes because it's wave-like. And the wave-like movement of the cosmos, as we come back to this the cosmology, is more the essence of our being, and is the way that emotion is to work through our vehicles. And it's only, as we already know, in damming it, that keeps it locked inside and makes these impressions that are difficult. But letting it flow is, that understanding might be part of what allows us the greater permission to be part of what is unpleasant without debilitating fear and the need to block it.
And that to be human is to really be witness to it and not judge it, but just, and then it passes, yes.
And witness doesn't mean not experiencing it.
Oh no, I believe it means experiencing it.
Yes.
It's just that you're not right in the center of the action. You're on the periphery of the action. But as you were saying, the waves hit, because I feel that there's something immensely hallowed in your story that comes in childbirth or in death. The waves come, and they're different. Because I know that when a babe is about to come forth, there's a moment where everything is suspended. It's almost time stands still. And then the child's cry is heard as it comes up, whether it's slipping out of the birth canal or being taken from the belly in cesarean, and it's just this extraordinary moment, which is spine chilling. I feel that moment of entry and leaving is just so exquisite about the nature of what life is all about. And part of the experiment that we were describing at the beginning of our conversation, that this is a cosmological experiment to see, can we be as awe-inspiring as they believe us to be? Not that there's any test involved. It's just let's be true, let's be expressive, let's not be frightened of wildness or volume, and let's just live with love at the core of it, because love will always take us forward, even if it's the love of the drama. I know you've been in moments, I'm sure, where it hasn't happened for some time, but I can remember in the ecstasy of passion, where I was arguing a point with a lover, that I would watch myself doing it and go on enjoying the drama.
Yes.
Until one's awareness is, look, is this really necessary? Why don't you move, now that you've expressed whatever the frustration or the irritation or whatever it was? Why don't you now move into harmony, both externally and internally?
Not just yet. I'm not done. After this.
Yeah. So hopefully this conversation has given our dear ones listening permission to feel the cosmology
Yes.
of feeling. And I
And
know,
we know it's not easy. All of us know that feeling and being wild and allowing, so many people must move somewhat timidly toward that. So permission to move, to be more expressive, far more expressive.
mm, mm,
Mm. Well,
yes,
it's just been so wonderful visiting with you again.
it's a very hallowed, very special to
Mm.
use the word yet again, and I thank you. And so we have reached a point of completion in our conversation for today, everybody who's listening. And so thank you so much for listening in. And as you well know, to reach this wonderful lady, all you need to do is go to her website, which is
Mahulili.com, MAHULILI.com. Thank you, Stewart.
my pleasure. And the best route, are you using that word route? It's an American, we say route in the United Kingdom, but the best route is www.dianathevoiceofchange.com. Now, that's an interesting thing we didn't talk about, the collective grieving of one as great as
Yes.
Diana, for example. We didn't go
Right.
into that. We personalized a lot of our grieving about the volubility of feeling. So that's something we'll reach into. Blessings
Yes.
and namaste, namaste, namaste to all you wonderful people listening.
Mm-hmm.